Hey, Graham, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Lori. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I met you 2 years ago for the first foray of Blue the Dive into the dive industry, and that was at DEMA. And at the time, I had no idea that there was a dive store like you out there. It was a complete shock to me that there was a business that was truly walking the sustainability talk in a huge way. So I'm so glad you're with us. And I want to ask how you started and why did you include the environment as such a big part of your business, considering most dive operators just use it as a backdrop. Why did you do that? When did you start, and why did you include the environment in a big way?
Well, it is rather shocking that there aren't more shops that have taken a greater initiative to try to preserve the resource that we all depend on for our livelihood. And hopefully that'll be changing here in the coming years. I started Ocean First Divers in 2005, and I had been through the PADI open water system a couple times. I had done it as a junior, and then I had done it as an adult, and actually had sat through it a third time with a girlfriend. And I realized at the end of it that there was no marine science at all in any of the open water curriculum. And essentially, the industry was turning out thousands and thousands of divers without any understanding of what they were going to see, and no appreciation of that marine environment. With that education comes understanding and ultimately appreciation. And so I wanted to start a dive shop that would instill that accountability and awareness into divers, and to create ocean stewards instead of just certified divers.
I love this. I just love it. So when you started, how did you start? Like, what did you do first off? I noticed that on your website you go straight for the issues. You have it right there. And this is completely opposite to what other dive stores are doing and dive operators are doing. And my first thought is the general public believes, or the general dive industry believes, that talking about issues is bad for business. What do you say to that?
I think not talking about issues is worse for business. But it's a challenge. The industry has been dominated by the same type of dive shop owner for decades. And it really hasn't had much of a focus or awareness on the marine environment. It's been about the adventure and the excitement, which is still important. But if we don't have coral reefs for divers to go and enjoy, then we're going to see greater attrition, which is what we've been seeing the last 10 years. The number of certified divers every year is dropping. And that's because we aren't doing a very good job not only creating passionate divers, but really to prevent that attrition. The first thing we did is we looked at, I bought an existing business that had been in the dive industry for about 20, 25 years. And so they had a established customer base and a good reputation in the industry. And I knew very little about the industry. I hadn't worked as a professional for very long at all. And so for the first little while, I wanted to kind of get a better understanding of how the industry operated, and specifically the nuances of the business that I had purchased. Some of the first things we did was we decided that we were going to include marine science in the open water curriculum. And even if it wasn't a standard teaching practice for the certification agencies, we were going to make it a standard practice at Ocean First. And so we looked at different companies to partner with, and ultimately ended up deciding that we were going to do it on our own. We started with a company called Beautiful Oceans out of Canada that does really neat marine science content. But it just didn't work for our model. And ultimately what we did is I started an online education company and have been creating the content for the open water curricula through that company. And right now we're partnering with SSI to include that as standard content in all open water classes. So that's the first thing we kind of did from an academic standpoint. From a environmental and sustainability standpoint, we did an audit of the business. So we looked at all the facets and identified what the environmentalists like to call the low-hanging fruit, the easiest things that we could do to make a difference right out of the gate. And most of the times this is pretty low investment stuff, light bulbs, cleaning supplies, certain paints and building materials around the facility. So we made a list of things that we could do that would not cost a lot of money and that could be easy to implement, and we started there. And slowly over time, we've begun taking on the more audacious projects, which are like solar, more capital intensive. But now the whole roof of Ocean First is solar PV and thermal. During peak sun times, we're off the grid with our electricity, and we've got a lot of really sophisticated equipment in the facility, both to keep a really clean pool and air quality, and then also just to reduce our overall carbon emissions. The first part seems great. Now, an average dive operation, an average dive retailer, they can do the low-hanging fruit, right? Is it difficult? How hard is it to do this stuff? It isn't particularly difficult. I think location highly influences the feasibility of some of these implementations. For example, we have a zero waste program, and we divert about 90% of our refuse to compost and recycle. Something like that could be difficult in certain island nations where they don't have that infrastructure. So I would say that a lot of the land-based operators in the United States could definitely adopt a lot of these principles very, very quickly and very easily. Some of the more remote island-based operators are going to have a little more of a challenging time. Things like choosing what building materials you use. That's a very conscious decision that anybody can make. Not using chemicals in the facility, the Clorox and the Windex, those sort of things. Again, those aren't quite as accessible for certain locations, but in general, that's something that most operators could implement if they wanted to. I think it boils down to education and lack thereof. I don't think that people don't want to make the right choice, but that they don't always know what the right choice is.
So we're going to talk about this later, how you're going to help other people walk this pathway as well. But I want to ask you how you got your customers to walk this pathway. Did they start to notice a difference? Do they appreciate it? What are they saying about you?
Well, we do have the luxury of living in one of the more environmentally conscious communities in the U.S., Boulder. So a lot of our customers gravitate towards that naturally. But we have customers that'll Google dive shop in Boulder or dive shop in Colorado. They'll find a list and they'll go to our website, and then they'll choose us because of our green initiatives. So the feedback has been very positive. And irrespective of what business we're in, people just like businesses that give back to the community and that are socially responsible, and it's not all about the bottom line. That the 3 Ps, the triple Ps, is really inherent in our business model, and people respect that. And as we're seeing in general with tourism, people are wanting to give back to the communities that they're going to visit. And it's no longer just a very lavish vacation where they might be on the beach and spending some time in the water. They want to actually participate and be more involved and do more of that service learning. So to the extent that we can provide opportunities for people to get engaged with our community and with the communities where we go and dive, our customers are very appreciative of that.
Well, let's start right there, because I want to talk to you about how you're managing the supply chain so that everything you offer is on the sustainable pathway. Let's start with travel. How do you choose the destinations you go to, and how do you choose the operators that you use?
It's a very good question, Lori, and it's certainly not a perfect system. While we're trying to improve the supply chain in that regard, we still have challenges because of just limitations to supply. There's only so many great destinations where people want to go diving, and then of those destinations, there's only so many places that are positioning themselves as environmentally responsible. So it can be challenging, and I don't want to say that we've solved that issue, but we're certainly working to improve it. It starts with just the network of retailers, travel specialists, and destinations that we have. It's a lot of word of mouth, where we'll hear about a destination in a particular country, and we'll do some due diligence and explore it. We'll call our wholesaler and find out what information they have. We look for organizations that are tied in with their local community. The hiring practices, just the human resources in general, how they treat the employees, how they pay their employees is very important. It's always good to have local people working at the dive center. They're more familiar with the culture, with the dive sites, and it's good to have that as part of the destination. We look at what sort of policies that the particular dive center has. If they have their own environmental best practices that they implement there. A great example is we found a place in Indonesia called Mosul that you're very familiar with, I know, in Raja Ampat. And their whole resort was built predominantly from materials that they found on the islands that had washed ashore. And they reclaimed a lot of the wood. They went to some solar. Those considerations are very important for us. But at the end of the day, when we go on liveaboards, they're not particularly environmentally responsible. And so we have to find ways to try to offset that carbon footprint, because there's really no sugarcoating the diesel that we're burning and the airfare and those sort of things. So it is a challenge, but we're constantly trying to refine our criteria and to find operators that really match with our philosophy.
So do you get your clients, your customers, to buy carbon offsets, or is that a part of the package? How do you balance out the carbon footprint? What do you do?
So we've gone through a couple of different iterations with that. For the first couple of years, Ocean First Divers paid all of the carbon emission sort of that was calculated through a carbon calculator for all of our trips. So flights, transportation, hotels, everything we included in the cost of the trip. It did raise the cost a little bit, and it eats into the profits. So it's something that a lot of operators aren't going to want to do voluntarily. So one idea we had was to offer that as an optional, additional cost to the customer. So the customer now has the opportunity to offset their travel if they wish. But we have stopped including it in all of our trips currently, though I want to go back to that model. And really, to be honest, it just came down to a cost savings analysis for us. And at the time, my shop wasn't in the financial state to be able to take on those costs ourselves. So we're trying to pass them off to the customer now. In a perfect world, it will be built into the costs of the trip.
What do your clients say about this? I mean, are they? How do you explain to them that you are trying to provide them with the best sustainable dive trip that you can? Are they open to this? Are they accepting of this? Do they expect this? And what are their reactions when they go to some of the places and it's not like Miami Beach? It is very local. What goes on?
There's different clientele like to go to different destinations. The clientele that appreciate that we're incorporating the costs of our footprint into the trip will appreciate that there's a little bit more of a cost associated with that, and they're willing to pay for it. It's when you're thinking about a multiple $1,000 trip over the course of a couple weeks, the additional cost is, I wouldn't say negligible, but it's very palatable. So most of the customers are very receptive to that. The customers that want to go to the Miami Beach type of environment aren't as concerned with offsetting their carbon footprint as much. And we don't have typically as much of those customers. But some customers just want to go to a really nice, 5-star beach resort, full service, and be doted on the whole time. Our trips are a little bit more for the adventurous spirit. We like to combine non-diving activities with diving activities. So whether it's kayaking or going on treks in the jungle, we try to provide opportunities for all sorts of adventure tourism, not just scuba diving. And so for the customers that we get for those types of trips, they're very understanding that, hey, to give an extra 20 or 30 bucks to the trip, to pay an extra 20 or $30 on a trip, to help offset our carbon footprint and potentially have a value-added benefit to the local community makes a lot of sense. And so people are willing to do that without really thinking about it too much.
And I imagine there are some operators that resorts and liveaboards that want your business. Are they willing to look at different ways of doing business when they start to do business with you and you show them how you operate? Are they open to adjusting their business practices to start down that path?
It's a good question, and it's certainly a challenge for us. We have found some operators that we're just conducting business in a very old school mentality, handing out plastic water bottles after every dive. And we basically tell them, look, we're not interested in supporting this kind of an operation. You guys should have water bottles. You should be thinking about how you're affecting the reef. You have 20 divers going in 3-4 times a day. What is your impact, and how can you mitigate that and make sure that this community isn't harmed from all of our activities? And most of the operators are receptive, and they see that this is actually a cost savings to them, and it's also a great way for them to position their resort or their boat as a green alternative, socially responsible alternative to other dive destinations. And so that's a value right there as well. For the operators that aren't willing to really budge much, we stopped using them and we just switch operators. And we've had to do that a few times, but the better that we can do up front in identifying operators that we want to work with, the less we'll have to worry about deciding not to do repeat business with them because they're not understanding what needs to be done.
With all these trips, all of your customers need gear, and so you work with gear manufacturers. How is the gear manufacturing sector doing in terms of sustainability? Do we have some up-and-coming companies that are doing a great job?
It's getting better. It's been pretty bad. When I started, for an example, Aqualung has gotten really good. They've gone their plant out here in the U.S. is one of their biggest ones is solar powered. They're using solar tubes for natural lighting. They're cutting down on their waste and packaging, recycling. So they're doing a lot of wonderful things to move in the right direction. When I started, they were sending us their snorkels individually wrapped in plastic bags. And we get, 20, 30 at a time sometimes. And we have all these plastic bags, and they were not recyclable plastic. They were the bad kind. And so we actually called Aqualung and we said, this is ridiculous. There's no need to do this. And sure enough, they changed their shipping practices. And not only did they stop shipping their snorkels to us in an individually plastic bag, but now they don't do that at all to their other retailers. So we've seen some pretty large-scale changes just by kind of being the squeaky wheel in Boulder, and that's wonderful. But these manufacturers take a long time to change because they're large-scale. They've been doing things a certain way for quite a while. And they see it as an additional cost that they have to absorb in order to maybe change their facility around or reduce packaging in certain areas. But at the end of the day, I think there's really no debate that it's less expensive. certain manufacturers are moving away from petroleum-based neoprene and moving towards limestone-based. And there's some questions now about how much better that is than petroleum-based. Patagonia is moving towards a completely green wetsuit, which is really exciting. They're not as involved in the dive industry, but they are so wonderful in what they do, just with textiles and in general in the outdoor industry, that they're a model for what the dive industry should be aspiring towards. So I like to look at them and see kind of what they're doing and how the dive industry could perhaps adopt some of their initiatives.
You are putting a certain amount of pressure on them to start looking at their business in a more sustainable way. How can the rest of us put a little bit of pressure on them to put sustainability on the radar?
Well, that's a $1 million question. One thing that we're trying to do is to get this kind of bottom-up support. You know, going to the manufacturers is challenging. Getting that adoption at that high level is very difficult. And that top-down approach is certainly important, but I think getting the consumers behind it and the dive shops on a local level is a really exciting way for us to incite large-scale change. One thing that I've been working on with the dive shop for about 7 years is an eco-certification program to assess the business practices of dive operators and to offer ways for them to improve their business practices. And as you know, Mickey with Ocean First Institute is championing that program right now. But our aspiration is to go to dive shops all around the world and say, look, there's a lot of really easy things you can do to improve your business. It's going to save you money in the long run. It's better for our ocean. And it's a great way for you to position yourself as a better company provider than your competition in the area that's not doing anything. And, you know, if we don't, 10 to 15 years down the road, we might not have dive clientele to show beautiful reefs to.
Well, that's exactly it, and it's important that we get on board now, and those who do are going to be perfectly positioned, whereas those who don't will not be positioned for the long term. And you are doing so much of the heavy lifting with Dr. Mickey at the lead for this dive certification, and you with your dive store starting to put some pressure on the suppliers. I think it's great, because this is how change happens, from the bottom up, not from the top down.
It's true. It is true. And one of the interesting things, I don't know if you know this, but Mares, the Italian scuba manufacturer, recently purchased SSI, the certification agency. And there's been a lot of concern about what that's going to do for the dive industry, because it's creating a very vertically integrated organization that not only can train divers and provide services for dive centers, but also can provide all of the equipment as well. And so there's concerns, well, are they going to force certain dive centers into purchasing Mares equipment and those sort of things? And it hasn't happened at all. But I think the opposite is actually starting to happen, where because SSI is very responsive to the dive centers, and they're hearing the calls, the cries that we're screaming about having to change the business practices of the industry and greening the industry in general. And so now SSI can go to Mares and say, the dive centers are asking for marine science in our courses. They're asking for less packaging in the equipment we send. They're asking for more recyclable products. And we want to respond to them, and we want to show them we're listening. And so now SSI can get into the kind of the food chain a little bit and put some upward pressure on some of the larger organizations that they work with, including Mares and some of the other equipment manufacturers. So I think it's actually been an exciting turn of events, because it's allowed us to get in front of some of the big boys that we might not have an opportunity to have an audience with if we didn't have those relationships.
Well, let's talk about certification agencies, because you originally were a PADI store, and you got an the environmental award, and then you worked on getting the Green Star eco certification program going at PADI. And now you're no longer at PADI, you're with SSI. So what happened? Why did you switch suppliers? Because the certification agency is actually a supplier. So what did you do?
Yeah, we did receive the Environmental Achievement Award every year since inception, and we were actually the only shop on the planet that had received that award every year. So that was a big feather in our cap. And actually, the Green Star program is something that Ocean First Divers created and had been pitching to PADI for years and was not getting the adoption that we were hoping for. And it wasn't until that I switched to SSI and was pursuing the dive center standard that PADI actually ended up embracing the Green Star program and launching it. And we were the inaugural recipient of that as well. But to answer your question, there was a number of things, both from a strategic standpoint, but also from an ethical and philosophical standpoint. My philosophies don't align with PADI's. And what SSI provided was support at the retail level. PADI is more focused on the individual diver and going after certifications, just large volumes of certifications, whereas SSI supports the dive center, which is essentially the backbone of the industry. And so they kind of take their initials out of the equation and they say, this is about Ocean First, it's about your business, and what can SSI do for you in order to help you become successful? There were some things that PADI had done. One of the most notable was they had partnered with a company called Caradonna and had started, which is a travel wholesaler, and they had started marketing to individual divers directly, circumventing the dive centers that had brought the customers to PADI in the first place, essentially cutting the dive centers out of the loop. And that caused a big backlash, and PADI rescinded on that. But it was, I think, just a testament to some questionable decisions that they made at the corporate level that weren't really in line with what I was trying to achieve at Ocean First.
Well, I noticed that when I Googled the Green Star Award on the PADI dive site, it doesn't list any of the operators that are actually getting the Green Star Award. And it kind of makes me wonder just what's going on with this. It's kind of strange. But to be totally frank, when TripAdvisor gives its awards and you try to search for which operators got the TripAdvisor Environmental Award, they don't come up either. So it's very interesting that these kinds of companies are using these awards as a way to highlight what they're doing and what their operators are doing, but it just kind of stops there and doesn't take it to the next level. I hope that SSI and PADI and all the other certification agencies start really looking at this and giving awards and letting people know who are the ones who are actually walking the talk, rather than letting them get lost in Google hell.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The challenge with the Green Star Award was trying to get dive shop buy-in. So we created these, call it 30 to 40 best practices that essentially assess the sustainability of a dive shop. But we weren't able to get a lot of that high-level top-down support from the gear manufacturers, from a lot of the marketing and communication companies. And so the question always became, oh, I got my cat here. The question always became, well, what's in it for me? Why would I, as a dive center, want to invest 20 hours of my time and $500 of my money to go through this process, get this accreditation, and then at the end of the day, what's it going to do for me? And that's really the crux of the standard. And so we're trying to build in that value into the standard so that a dive operator sees that 20-hour, $500 investment as a return of $3,000 and ongoing savings of 75% of the cost that they're maybe incurring currently. So that's where we want to go with the dive center standard, which is really a more robust version of the Green Star. When PADI finally accepted the Green Star and decided that they were going to adopt it as their own, I don't think that they fully bought in themselves. And so that value wasn't inherent with the award. And so if PADI's not pushing it, saying to the operators, you need to go through this process, you need to get this award, and PADI alone could build in enough values into the Green Star Award that every shop that's a PADI shop would want to get this award. They could reduce the buying levels for the price levels for these operators. When you go to PADI and you enter in a zip code to search for a dive shop, the shops that have the Green Star Award could appear first before, like sponsored links on Google. I've given PADI a laundry list of things that they could do to build value into this award. If they did that, and then they promoted the award to all their dive centers, you bet that most of the operators would want to go through it because they would see the value there. Oh, I have less costs associated with the stuff I'm buying from PADI. I've got priority marketing exposure and all these other things. But PADI hasn't really gotten behind it and pushed it. So to your point, they released it, they launched it, and they've sort of just swept it under the carpet and they haven't really been doing much with it. I think if PADI got on board, this whole thing would have a tremendous amount of momentum. But they're the big elephant in the room when it comes to the dive industry and who can make the biggest change the quickest. They are very, very good at marketing and they have worldwide exposure and reach. So if they were supporting what we're trying to do, I think the industry would move very quickly.
What you're doing with this dive center standard it's pretty amazing because it's not just some ad hoc list of to-dos. Hello, Kitty. You've actually gone to Sustainable Travel International. You've done your due diligence. They are experts at this, so this is a very robust system that you've put together, and it's done in increments so that people can slowly work their way through. How do dive operators get involved, or how at least can you give them a walkthrough of what they might experience? Is there a free version of this? Like, how do you vet this?
Yeah, it is based off of really a lot of research in the field. And as you pointed out, Sustainable Travel International put this together for Royal Caribbean, actually, of all organizations, to try to improve the business practices of the operators that Royal Caribbean has contracts with. And so Royal Caribbean had mandated by the end of this year that they wanted half of the 6,000 different excursions that they have contracts with be certified through what was called the Shore Excursion Standard. And STI and Ocean First Divers and SSI collaborated on creating the Dive Center Standard, which is what we have today. So those 30 to 40 best practices are based off of what STI created for Royal Caribbean and all of their operators that they work with. To answer your question about how to get started, there's a self-assessment, a desk assessment, and then an on-site assessment. So the easiest thing to do to get started is to do the self-assessment. And I would direct any interested parties to Mickey, who is championing the program and has made a lot of headway with it. And actually at 1 o'clock this afternoon, I have a presentation from some grad students that she's been working with on how we're going to get this standard out in the dive industry and in front of all these operators. So I'm really excited for that.
She's done an amazing job of talking about it at another interview that we did. She's a great lady and knows her stuff, and she's a scientist working in the business field. I love it. I see all these crossovers. It's amazing. But you're saying that people can come in and they can do a self-assessment and see whether this is something that they can embrace.
Absolutely. Yeah, the self-assessment is kind of a gut check to show them where they are in relation to where they want to be. It also raises questions or issues that they might not have been thinking about. Business practices that might seem sort of obvious, but until you're in it every day and you have the opportunity to see ways to improve your business, you might not actually think about it. So the self-assessment is kind of no commitment. They can go through the best practices that we've identified with STI and kind of just see in a nutshell where they are. The next step is the self-assessment, and that requires a registration and a application fee that goes to Ocean First Institute. A portion of those proceeds go to STI to pay for the development of this standard. And the self-assessment is essentially the same, or excuse me, the desk assessment is essentially the same as the self-assessment, but it's actually, you need supporting materials. So you can't just say, oh, well, we use all moorings and we don't drop anchors. Well, you have to have some sort of proof that the company has a policy that they don't drop anchors and that they use mooring lines. Does the company have a mission statement? You can't just say yes, you have to supply what the mission statement is. So all the supporting documentation along with the desk assessment goes to Mickey, and she goes through the assessment process, verifies all the data is accurate, and assigns a score to each of the best practices. And then if they pass, they get the certification, and they'll get a diploma and some marketing materials, a sticker, those sort of things that they can advertise. And then eventually we want to get to the point where this becomes a recognized emblem in the dive center, just like the PADI 5-star or the SSI Diamond Dealer. The eco-certification emblem will mean that this dive center is a green or sustainable dive shop.
There's no, you don't have to be a specific certification agency shop to do this. You can be aligned with any of the certification agencies to do this.
Correct. Yep. It's not agency specific. It's more about how you run your business. It doesn't even get into the training curriculum that you teach. In fact, you could be a marine-based operator that just takes dive excursions and doesn't actually do any teaching at all. So it's not specific to an agency. It's more about, are you running a business in sustainable ways? Are there ways for you to improve your business? And can we, to that extent, can we provide suggestions on how to improve your business, reduce your costs, and make yourself more attractive to customers?
There's so many benefits that have been brought up in this summit. And one of the benefits that we haven't really touched on, which I see now as we walk through this pathway, is that with your sustainable business model that you're walking with, a dive store can actually take back control of their business. It seems to me as an outsider looking in, I did work at a dive shop ages ago, but from the outside looking in now, I see that certification agencies and manufacturers tend to tell the store what to do. But now, as you are walking this pathway, you are now telling them how you are going to do business and are they going to get on board. And this is a very big step for retailers. And it's a very positive step, because now you can actually call the shots, whereas before you had to kind of toe the line. And I'm so glad that this is what you're doing. You are showing people that this is exactly what happened for you. Is your business has flipped. The tail is no longer wagging the dog. You are in control of your business model by following the sustainable practices that you're doing. It's very exciting.
It is, yeah, thank you. One of the most exciting things from all of this is what I had mentioned earlier is seeing the change on an industry level, because incorporating marine science into our open water class is all fine and dandy, but if we're only teaching 6 to 10 people at a time, it's a very small reach. But when we're able to say to SSI, look, there's no marine science in the open water curriculum, there's hundreds of thousands of people getting certified, we're not teaching them anything, we're the last point of contact for them before they go into the ocean, we have this opportunity to leave an indelible impression on them to care for what they're about to go explore. And SSI said, you're right, we acknowledge that. We're going to now add a section 6 into the open water manual that's all about the marine environment. That, to me, is one of the most exciting things that we've been able to change in the last 6 or 7 years, because you're right. I've really been limited by what I've been able to do, being a very small shop in inland, Colorado. Who's going to listen to us? What are we going to be able to do on a big scale? And it can be daunting and discouraging, to say the least. But we've kept at it, and we keep trying to get these small victories in order to get this momentum. And fortunately, we're not the only ones having to cry out and wave the flag for change. Other industries are doing it. I think the discussions on global warming and ocean acidification have pervaded all industries. And I think people in general are starting to realize, look, there's too many people on the planet. We're causing large-scale change faster than we've ever seen before. We got to do something about it. And so that helps, because it's not just some hippies in Boulder that are trying to do something, just let them, make their war cries, but it's not really going to make much difference. Now we're starting to see people, their ears perk up and say, oh, you know what? These types of businesses get it. They're on the vanguard of where the industry needs to go, and everybody needs to get on board. And so to be at the beginning of that movement, not in the environmental movement per se, but in the industry certainly, is very exciting. And Ocean First Divers, the name says it all. We really want to put the ocean first. Obviously, our customers and their satisfaction and enjoyment is paramount. But if we don't have an ocean to share with them, then I don't have a business here, and we're in much bigger trouble than that.
Well, what I love to say is that what happens in Boulder doesn't stay in Boulder. That's the reality, folks. Everybody listening. Watching
That's
this.
A good point. And having just come back from Vegas, I like that spin on.
Listen, Graham, thank you so much for all that you're doing, and your whole team. Your team. You run a very tight, lean machine, but it's amazing how much your team can accomplish and how it's impacting our industry and communities beyond Boulder. So thank you for all that you do, and for people who are watching this, don't forget to watch Dr. Mickey's interview. She fills in a lot of the gaps that were not explained on this presentation. So again, thank you, Graham. Wonderful. Have a wonderful trip to Cuba, and thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure, Lori. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Well, we're here to do it together, right?
All right, we are, and we will continue to battle side by side.
Excellent. Well, we're going to be talking soon. Thanks again.
All right, safe trip to DC.
Thank you.